Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a fascinating concept, leadership coalesces. Have you ever wondered why certain people just naturally become leaders, even when they totally lack the official title? Well, it's not magic. There is a hidden architecture to it. And today, we're going to decode exactly how leadership practically forms out of thin air.
Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to picture a jazz band playing live on stage. They're just jamming, right? The music is flowing and suddenly it's time for a solo. But there's no conductor. There's absolutely no sheet music telling them exactly who takes the spotlight next. And yet, seamlessly, one musician steps forward, the phrase begins, and the rest of the band instantly adjusts to support them. No one formally assigned that solo. The space just organically opened up for them.
Now bring this back to your own life. Think about the meetings you're sitting in every single week. Have you ever noticed how a team will naturally defer to one specific person, even when there isn't a boss in the room? Just picture those slightly awkward pauses when a really tough question gets asked. Almost like magic, the entire room's gaze just shifts to one individual. Why does that happen? And more importantly, how does it happen? What we're actually witnessing in those moments isn't random at all. It's a very specific, highly predictable behavioral pattern. It's a phenomenon where attention literally stops scattering around the room and just starts returning to the exact same place over and over. It's what our source material brilliantly calls attention finding a focus. Now, it starts off feeling completely natural, but make no mistake, this is the invisible foundation of how informal authority is built. Let's literally slow things down for a second and look at the exact anatomy of this kind of moment. Step 1, a question comes up, usually something kind of ambiguous or complex. Step 2, the room slows, right? Someone asks the question and turns slightly, another person follows without even thinking about it, a third person pauses instead of just speaking up, and then step 3, attention returns to the exact same place it is returned to before. No one explicitly says, hey, let's go ask them. There's no formal agreement, but the pattern executes flawlessly. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive gap between how we think companies operate and reality. Formal authority, that's the myth of the perfectly structured org chart, right? The assigned titles, the official roles, printed on those glossy business cards. But informal authority, that's what actually happens on the ground. It is driven by habit, by the desperate desire for speed, and by the undeniable gravitational pull of where the room's attention repeatedly goes whenever things get complicated. Our sources capture this dynamic perfectly with this quote. It's not on the chart, but leadership coalesces around you. Every time it's fuzzy, the call still comes back to you. You see, even when decision-making roles are technically unassigned or, even if they're officially supposed to be shared across some committee, human nature just takes over. Whenever the ground gets fuzzy, the heavy lifting inevitably slides right back to that exact same individual. So why exactly does this happen? Well, there are 4 really powerful forces of habit at play here. First, there's familiarity. We just feel safer looking to someone who has successfully answered before. Then, speed favors the usual path. It's honestly just faster to go to the default person than to debate who should decide. Then there's uncertainty, which creates this intense pressure to move. Silence is uncomfortable, so we desperately want a quick resolution. And look, let's be honest, there's dodging. Avoiding a risky decision yourself neatly cements the other person's status as the leader. Initially, looking to this default person feels great. It feels super efficient. It feels like real progress. Someone has the answer, and boom, the meeting can move forward. But here's the catch. Repetition actually changes what the moment means. What starts out as just one possible way to handle a problem subtly shifts into a permanent behavioral pattern. The whole group starts to learn this pattern without even realizing it's happening. Now, what's really interesting here is the turning point. The very moment that expectation becomes consistent, we start to see the hidden costs of informal leadership. The dynamic goes from being this helpful little shortcut to a rigid constraint. The room no longer looks around for answers. It literally only looks in one direction. And this triggers a massive, massive shift in how everyone else in the room behaves. We call this the narrowing of responses. Because the group expects the default leader to speak, people begin to anticipate what will be said and how it'll be handled. Consequently, some people start speaking less, or they just wait a little longer to see what the leader thinks first. Eventually, others stop offering their ideas entirely. And here's the vital thing to understand. They aren't doing this out of resistance. Actually, scratch that. It's not laziness either. They are doing it purely out of adjustment. The space for alternative ideas shrinks because the group has simply learned to defer. This creates an incredibly complex and sometimes really isolating experience for the default decision maker. I mean, at first, they probably feel incredibly trusted and valued, right? But as our sources point out, Over time, something else becomes visible. The room begins to wait, not for an answer, for them. The silence in the room is no longer a collaborative pause. It's this heavy, directed expectation aimed entirely at one person's shoulders.
So the crucial point is this: authority forges through repetition. It is not declared from on high, it is learned through everyday experience. And once this pattern really stabilizes, it becomes incredibly difficult to share or hand off the work. Even if that default leader actively wants to empower their team or really wants someone else to step up, the gravitational pull of the room's habit is often just way too strong to break easily.
Think about how wild this macro truth is for a second. Repetition makes one person the default path long before the org chart ever moves. The organizational structure hasn't changed, the people in the room haven't changed, the actual work hasn't changed. Literally, only the room's attention has shifted. And yet that shift is powerful enough to change absolutely everything about how that team functions. This micro example of a pause in a meeting room, it actually dictates the macro health of the entire company. Because once someone becomes the default path, it dictates whether critical information moves freely or just stalls out entirely. It controls if problems surface early or if they are dangerously delayed until it's way too late. The formal structure doesn't even matter anymore. The only thing that matters is what actually reaches that default decision maker. If problems can reach them, they get fixed. If they can't, well, they remain entirely unseen by the organization.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer today, but I want to leave you with a question to take into your very next meeting. Really look around that table and ask yourself, who is the default path in your room? And maybe more importantly, what brilliant ideas or critical warnings are simply not being said right now because everyone is just sitting there waiting for them? Thanks so much for exploring this with me today. Keep observing, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.